Hi, everybody. Welcome to our very first tech podcast. The purpose of this podcast is to hear from other teachers and see what they're doing in the classroom, how they're using technology, and also just to get to know the teachers. Sometimes we don't get to see other teachers until we have WASC meetings, and we don't want to do that right now. So we'll go ahead and just get to know these teachers as well. We're very happy to have Ellie Blanchard as our first guest. So Ellie, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself, where you came from, and how you ended up at Walnut High School.
Okay, so I teach science at Walnut High. I teach anatomy and physiology. I teach bio honors, and I also teach in the PLTW program, and I teach medical interventions. My journey to get here, I was at Cal State Fullerton, and during that time, I had to observe so many hours before going into the teaching program. So I actually observed at Diamond Bar and kind of got introduced. I know, don't give me a dirty look. And got kind of introduced to the district. So I knew of it. I actually taught my first year in Colorado because my husband and I thought that we were going to move there and live there forever. But we missed home too much, so we came back, and I saw that there was an opening at Walnut. And I remember telling my husband, if I get this job, I will be so happy. This is like my dream job, because I knew how wonderful the district was. And I flew out for the interview and then found out a couple days later, Barbie called me and offered me the job. And now Walnut's going to have to like kick me out and before I die someday.
Well, it's good to have you here. I did not know you were came all the way out here for the interview. Wow, yes. Dedication. So we went to distance learning last March 13th. It's been like 9 months. What was that transition like for you? What were you doing in the class beforehand? Was it an easy transition in terms of technology in the classroom, or was there a lot of learning curve?
I think I can speak for most science teachers, our biggest concern or qualm was how are we going to get kids to be engaged with the content, because we're so used to doing labs and a lot of hands-on student-driven stuff. So when we first transitioned, that was definitely a big fear of mine, because sometimes virtual labs lack in the content area or those skill sets that we want students to take away. So that was definitely my big fear, especially going into another semester of distance learning this fall. I was like, okay, what are we going to do? Are we going to try to get them to come pick up kits, or maybe we could transition to doing something at home in some way? So that was the hard part. I think in terms of tech in general, I was very into Google Classroom before this all happened. So it's definitely been a big push for me in a good way. Like, I've been able to transition a lot of stuff to Google Classroom, and it's forced me to learn things that I'm not sure would have learned if I wasn't put in this position. So in some ways, I'm grateful.
So going back to the labs, obviously science, huge part. What was the outcome of that? How are we doing labs now?
So I know for me and for a lot of other teachers I talk to, we find labs that we know you can easily do at home. For example, there is like a tonicity lab. So you basically see how molecules can come in and out of a cell. And you can use a carrot and salt water at home for that. And so that's one lab that we did this year, where kids had to set up a lab and record a Flipgrid showing their setup and what the results were. So anytime I can plug in a lab, I know that they can get supplies in their kitchen or home. That's the way that I go about it now.
So you mentioned Flipgrid. We kind of talked about that in distance learning when we started. How often do you use Flipgrid? Is that just for labs, or is it something else that you find yourself using?
I definitely use it a couple times a month, I would say, and it's mostly for labs. Most recently, I had students do a modeling project. So I asked them to find things in the house that could represent a cell, and they had to go through the stages of cell division. And so they were allowed to use any crafts, or some people use food. So I've really liked Flipgrid for that, just to be able to get them to present and kind of do those modeling projects that are hands-on that I used to do a lot in the classroom.
So we transitioned to the school year. We're still in distance learning, never to come back. What has changed? Obviously, you kind of were hoping, I just got to get through 6 weeks, but now I've got a whole 16 weeks to go. What have you sort of added to your repertoire, so to speak?
So I feel like I had to kind of shift my mindset, and especially with, I think, science and maybe like social studies can relate. We have to deliver content and then we do some kind of activity, that like what we've been talking about, the activity. So I was thinking, if I sit and I lecture in a Zoom meeting every single day, these kids, how am I going to know that they're engaged? And if it were me, I wouldn't want to do that for 3 80-minute blocks a day. So I've always wanted to flip the classroom, and it sounds funny to say that, but I did this semester. I flipped the classroom. So I record all my lectures on Edpuzzle. And then when we're together during a Zoom, I try to do some kind of engaging, like either group activity, Pear Deck. I use Jamboard a lot, Kahoot, something that I know that I can kind of address and progress monitor what they know. So it's been a little bit of a transition to do that, but now I'm kind of in my groove. It's weird to like record yourself weekly lecturing, and it's been a little bit of work outside of class, but it's made me want to go back to school and do flipped classroom when I return as well.
Oh, nice. That was actually what we were kind of leading towards, is so when you come back, hopefully we come back, is that you would continue with the sort of Edpuzzles for homework and that kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, it might not work out every single section. There's definitely some sections that are better to do in person. But for the most part, yeah, I'm going to keep all my Edpuzzles, maybe redo a couple, and then I would love to make that homework instead of the stuff that they really need me for. So sometimes, you do your lecture and then they go home and they need you then. So
Yes.
it's kind of nice to do that in person instead.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned Jamboard. How do you use Jamboard in the classroom?
So I would say that I've used it in 3 big ways that could probably translate to any subject area. I've done really simple ones where I just post an essential question on it, and then through Jamboard, kids can get a sticky note, like a Post-it, and they can write their answer, and then they all just put their Post-it notes on there. So it kind of is a way to facilitate a conversation, and I can kind of check their understanding. It's low pressure because they don't have to put their name on it. I don't have to grade it. But if there is a misconception, I can address it right away. Another way that I probably my favorite way to use it is that I call them digital posters. So I will put them into breakout rooms, and each room will have either like a different medical scenario if it's that class, or recently for bio honors, I had a different genetic misconception. And I gave them just some guidelines, like how to address the misconception if they come across it, to correct it, put some pictures on there. And then when we come back as a group, each group will present. And so I can share the Jamboard and present it that way. So those usually take like 25, 30 minutes, depending on what prompt I give them. And then the third way I've used it is in our place of a lab that we normally do in my medical interventions class. And I had them draw results. And so Pear Deck would be good for that too. So it just kind of depends. But I like with Jamboard and like why I would choose Jamboard over Pear Deck in this situation is it archives their notes on our Google Classroom. So anytime they need to go back and reference the notes, they can look at it. So we kind of like build our notes together through Jamboard.
That's actually really cool. So do you have like a go-to site for resources? Like I know for math, there's certain math sites that we would always want to hit up that would have stuff, especially during distance learning, because it's a whole new way of doing stuff. Are there any sites that you kind of lean on for resources, or is this just coming from the top of your head?
Yeah, I would love to say it's all from the top of my head, but most of it comes from conversations with other teachers, really. But my straightforward answer is no. I don't have one go-to site. There are several good sites out there, and then I just kind of roll with the punches and get good ideas. I would even say, like, you don't have to have one main site. You could use worksheets for some of the stuff that I do. Break up the worksheets that have 7 questions into 7 breakout rooms and have the kids answer them and come back together. So I do stuff like that. Like the scenarios that I told you about for the medical situations, that's from my anatomy textbook. And they're usually like a worksheet that kids do, but instead of doing it that way, I just put one of each scenario on a different Jamboard slide and give the kids the work to do that way.
Okay, so I know when I was teaching, I screwed up a lot in class, made a lot of mistakes. A lot of teachers right now are feeling like there's this pressure. They're kind of feeling like they have to be perfect all the time. Would you be willing to share like one of your biggest, like, oh man, I totally screwed up on this during this time?
Man, that's on the spot. I'm trying to think of something. Well, I mean, it's not a big screw, but it's something happened today. It always happens because I have 3 classes, so it's always like that first class is my guinea pig, and it's probably most teachers can relate that you just forget to post something. So that's happened to me several times. I'm like, yeah, it's posted on Google Classroom, and then they're like, they can't find it. And today I had all my kids in anatomy join a Pear Deck, and then I never actually clicked the button on the slides with questions for them to input an answer. So they basically went into my Pear Deck for no reason at all.
My first period was always a guinea pig. I used like Socrative for tests, and I would see all of a sudden like live, I'd see all these red marks coming in for this one question. I'm like, what the heck is going on? Is everybody, no matter who, like the brightest, the low, everybody was getting it wrong. And I went on and I realized that, oh, I had the complete wrong answer. Yeah. So I totally get the first period's the guinea pig class. So you mentioned Edpuzzle when we come back. Is there anything else that you think that when we finally come back on campus you might bring with you besides Edpuzzle?
Edpuzzles are for sure. Honestly, probably everything. But I think like you mentioned, like trying to keep things simple with one side or not to overdo it. And I've realized, like, as the weeks have gone on, like I have some go-to sites that I like, not necessarily for content, but just for delivery of content. So Edpuzzle, I'm really enjoying Pear Deck. I've used it before, but I didn't realize how useful it is. You can do every lecture that way, every lecture to progress monitor. So I'm like, I'm just going to always do it. They can easily join on their phones. I don't have to get a Chromebook cart every time I use it, which is kind of where my mindset was before distance learning. And then I also love Flipgrid, even though it's not something that is necessary for everything. Like some of those modelings where they can kind of do almost like stop motion types of presentations are really neat. And I'll probably continue to do that type of stuff.
So what are you looking forward to the most when we get back?
I'm looking forward to, and this sounds cheesy, but just getting to know my students again. That has been, I think all teachers can relate. Like we do our best. I do weekly check-ins, and some of them definitely are having an easier time showing their personalities doing a Zoom. But I miss that connection and hearing. I have been fortunate enough to teach seniors a lot, and so I always get to hear where they're going to go and what they want to do next, and have a lot of those kinds of fun future conversations. So I'm looking forward to that. And I also miss the camaraderie with the teachers on campus.
All right, last question. It is almost Christmas. Well, it's Christmas season. Coach has been playing Christmas songs since like October. So we'll get you out on a nice, easy question here. What is your go-to Christmas movie?
Ooh, I think this is a movie that people don't associate with Christmas. Now, I've got so many going through my head. 2, okay, Christmas Story. I love Christmas Story, but that's a classic, right? And then also Love Actually is a good movie around Christmas time.
Okay, I was wondering, because I asked this question, and I always wonder what people say. You are the first person that's ever mentioned that movie. That is a go-to movie for my wife and I.
See, that was my first
Christmas,
choice.
We put it on, kids go to bed because it's rated R, kids can't watch it. And it's just so good. It hits every type of movie out there. Oh, love that movie.
Yeah, so that was the first one that came to mind, but then I think it's like Fox or something always does Christmas Story for like 24 hours, so I always have to put that on too.
Okay, Ellie, thanks for joining us today. Thanks for your input. Everybody, I hope you enjoyed what you had to say, and look forward to seeing you guys next time. Thanks again.